Polearms are in an interesting space for uniques, since with the prevalence of runewords, it's fairly rare a unique item can compete with the top slots, but polearms fly in the face of that, with several of them being competitive with runewords and a few even being best in slot for several builds. So today let's take a look at that. As usual, we should probably start with the normal uniques and move our way up to show the progression. The most basic one being Dim Oak's Hue. A fairly solid polearm for level 8 despite its low damage. It packs a bit of increased attack speed, a fairly large chunk of dexterity for the level, and a solid amount of enhanced damage. While it's not going to be a great weapon in Nightmare, in terms of punching your way through normal with a polearm, it can be a solid option. Next is a polearm that is pretty much the opposite for me, and that is Steel Goad, because it's a melee weapon that has monster flee on it, which I find annoying as hell. But it does have a good chunk of deadly strike and a little bit of resist to help out. I just don't find it redeeming enough, especially since Dim Oak's average damage is only a little lower than this weapon's maximum. After that, we have a much more reasonable polearm for use, and that is Soul Harvest, which is basically just a somewhat better Malice for more relaxed play. With decent reliable damage, mana leech, open wounds, and a fairly large boost to all resist, has the defensive perks to make up for losing a shield early while still doing okay with the rest of its functionality. Malice will be a little better for speed, but this definitely sits strong where it's at in normal. Next is Battle Branch, a polearm that pretty much guarantees my use of an Act 2 mercenary in normal if I find it, and that's because it's when you first start seeing polearm damage really go up. But on top of that, it packs solid increased attack speed and life leech, which are awesome on a mercenary, and the little bit of dexterity can be nice as well if you're using this on a druid build instead. Another interesting normal polearm is Woe Stave, the unique halberd. Packing similar damage to Battle Branch, it may lack increased attack speed, but it packs in a lot of mods that really mess with the enemy, with 50% open wounds, blind target, freeze target, and slow target. It can really make enemies much easier to deal with than otherwise would be. And like Battle Branch, this can be semi-useful even into early Nightmare and is a candidate for possible exceptional upgrade if you don't find better, since it's relatively cheap, though I wouldn't take either to Elite. Last up in normal is the Grim Reaper, which sounds scarier than it is. Unlike the previous two, this is only a mediocre upgrade candidate compared to them because it relies on a smaller percent boost, but it does have nice enough mods to carry you into Nightmare at least, despite being listed with less raw damage, and that's because of the 100% deadly strike, effectively doubling the damage output with this weapon. And the little bit of mana leech to keep you swinging is pretty nice too. In the exceptionals, we have a little bit of an odd fascination with plus skills on polearms, starting with the aptly named Meat Scraper, which packs itself with a life leech and open wounds as the name suggests, but also decent damage, increased attack speed, and plus to Barbarian masteries. Combined with a pinch of Magic Find, I've used it a few times in Nightmare for solo self-found runs, and it works out just fine for that purpose. Another somewhat fun good in Nightmare polearm is the Black Leech Blade, which brings a few interesting tidbits to the table. With reasonable damage and a bit lower requirement, but still comes with enough life leech to matter, and also packs on a scaling maximum damage per level, and even throws in a chance to cast Weaken on Striking, which can be pretty useful for reducing the potency of enemies, or even helping counteract some of the boosts they can get from boss mob auras, or even just weakening them in general. Though, as of recording this, they have not stated specifically how they're going to modify Weaken in 2.4, so we'll see how that pans out in the future. It could be better, it could be worse. Back on the plus skills trend I mentioned, we have Athena's Wrath, with plus to druid skills, increased attack speed, and a double dip of damage boost with both the normal percent boost as well as plus maximum damage per level effect. It also stacks in a boost to dexterity and a scaling boost to life as well. Though with how mechanics work, that would be scaled better with just flat plus life, but it's still not bad, and it is a good Fury Druid weapon in Nightmare. After that, we have the Barbarian version with Pierre Tombale Couant, which I will never be able to pronounce properly, and that was probably a complete butchering, and I apologize. But it does come with 3 Barbarian skill levels, a chunky amount of damage, as well as mana leech, faster hit recovery, and attack rating, but more importantly than any of that, a 55% chance of deadly strike, which can help double the damage you do with this already reasonably high damage polearm. Only real drawback is its speed, or lack thereof, but not all skills necessarily need to aim for that. Getting off of skills for a second again, we have another polearm I will mispronounce, and that is the Husuldo Evo. With a bit more variable damage than our last entry, this one does come with increased attack speed and slips in replenished life, though it loses out on a lot of nice perks that came with it as well, so while this is a big stick that will hit hard, it's usually not among my top picks for the exceptional polearms, especially with its comparatively high stat requirements. The last of the exceptionals goes back to plus skills and is actually a weapon I've made builds around from time to time just for fun, and that is Grimm's Burning Dead. It's basically the Necromancer Scythe, and yes, I have an upgraded one as well, just for that use. But basically it packs plus Necro skills to fit the theme, but also packs in some traits that really do make it a bit more viable for Necromancers, such as minus requirements, minus enemy defense, plus attack rating, and even a bit of off-weapon boosted defense. All of this with a reasonable bump to damage, as well as extra raw fire damage and fire resist. It's not the be-all, end-all of Polearms, but I do appreciate what they were going for with the Grim Reaper Necromancer vibe, though I would have swapped the base for this and Athena's personally for a more authentic look. Then finally we get into the elites, with each of these having actually had at least a bit of time in the limelight at one point or another. 2 of them are still highly sought after, with the other 2 being more just fun diversions anymore. One of those diversions is Bonehew, which some people will hate me calling it a diversion, but it's casting Bone Spear on striking. It's not always ethereal, but I figured I'd show this one off since people act weird when I mention having used one late game on a solo self-found run, since I actually slapped 2 Am runes into this natural 2 sockets previously, and it worked out exceptionally well on my mercenary. After that, we have one of the more sought-after polearms, which is often considered one of the best in slot options for Act 2 mercenaries, and that is Reaper's Toll. Usually preferably ethereal, but non-ethereal is plenty strong, packing reasonable enhanced damage, ignore target defense, life leech cold damage, and deadly strike. Even with its base functions, it would be strong. But what makes it so desirable is actually a 33% chance of casting Decrepify, which is pretty much a guaranteed piercing of physical immunity when triggered, and works exceptionally well for a lot of builds in the game. So while you may hear about Insight and Infinity more because of how many people just favor casters, this is the polearm you want for any physical damage builds. Next is a polearm that is used in a lot of things, but probably the most popular is on druids, though Act 2 mercenaries can use it as well, and that is Tomb Reaver, with massive natural attack speed, great damage, resist all, life per kill, mana find, etc. It is just a great polearm to begin with, and would be good even without sockets, but the fact that it can spawn with anywhere from 1 to 3 sockets can make it quite powerful, with one of the most sought after versions being a high roll with 3 sockets and ethereal, since it is easily one of, if not the best weapon for Fury Druids in the game for just raw damage, even if you have to burn a Zod on it, though even non-ethereal is still a great weapon. Last up is Stormspire, which did have a super brief time in the limelight, but is pretty much forgotten about nowadays. It just doesn't stack up to the other big polearms, though it does stick with its lightning theme quite well, with Chain Lightning and Charge Bolt when struck, Lightning Retaliation, Lightning Resists, and Lightning Damage stacked on top of moderate damage for an elite and increased attack speed. It's cool, it's rare, but it's not really important to any major builds.